Most people think the inflation we're dealing with today came out of nowhere, a mix of COVID shutdowns, supply chain messes, and stimulus checks. But what almost nobody realizes is that the roots of today's inflation stretch back nearly 20 years to a conflict most Americans barely think about anymore. Because one of the hidden engines behind the financial pressure we feel today is the long and incredibly expensive cost of the Iraq War. When the US invaded Iraq in 2003, the expectation was a fast, limited operation. Instead, it became one of the most expensive US wars of the modern era. Direct government spending on the Iraq War has been estimated at around $1.7 trillion, and when you factor in long-term obligations, like veterans' disability payments, medical care that will last decades, reconstruction, and interest on the money borrowed to finance the war, many economists estimate the total cost could reach up to about $3 trillion. And here's the part that matters for today. The US didn't finance the war the way it financed World War II, with tax increases and national rationing. Instead, almost the entire cost was covered by borrowing, issuing debt year after year while the rest of the economy continued operating normally. That borrowing didn't just add numbers to a spreadsheet, it reshaped the entire financial landscape of the United States. Because the more the government borrowed, the more sensitive the entire economy became to interest rates. High interest rates make government debt more expensive, and as the Iraq and Afghanistan wars stretched on, policymakers leaned heavily toward policies that kept borrowing costs low. From the mid-2000s through the 2010s, the US lived in an environment of historically low interest rates, expanded liquidity, and an economy increasingly dependent on cheap credit. Then came the 2008 financial crisis, then came the slow recovery, then came an entirely new decade of low rates designed to keep the system afloat. By the time we reached 2020, the US wasn't just entering a pandemic. It was entering it after nearly 2 decades of elevated deficits, war-related borrowing, and an economy built on easy money. And then the shock hit. Within months, more than $4 trillion in pandemic spending was injected into an economy already saturated with cheap credit. Consumers had money, supply chains were broken, production couldn't keep up, and inflation, real sustained inflation, surged to the highest levels the US had seen in over 40 years. Here's the key idea. The Iraq War didn't directly cause the inflation of the 2020s. Inflation is complicated and no single factor explains everything, but the long-term financial cost of the war, especially the decision to finance it almost entirely through borrowing, helped create the economic environment we were living in long before the pandemic started. An environment dependent on cheap money, low rates, and massive government debt. So the next time you feel everyday prices rising, remember, inflation isn't just created by what happens today. Sometimes it's created by decisions made decades earlier, decisions whose real costs are only now coming due. Thanks for watching. If you want more breakdowns like this, make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.